The session is being recorded, but I'll touch on that in a little minute. So anyone who has missed this first part of the presentation can view it on the recording. So good afternoon, everyone. You're very welcome to our webinar today with regards the true value of trails. Today we'll be focusing on the SROI Toolkit. And presenting today we have Joe and Elizabeth. So Kerry, if you want to go on to the next slide. Okay, so for anyone that doesn't know who Outscape are, our vision is a more active and healthy society, appreciating the outdoors, and we're a not-for-profit organisation working across the island of Ireland. And the diagram there just shows our remit across the various areas, including advocating for integration of outdoor recreation, developing frameworks and strategies, planning and creating high quality trails and green spaces, and the reason that we're here today, offering sector training, increasing awareness of outdoor opportunities, and also implementing participation programs. So if today we're going to talk about the SROI Toolkit, and just a few housekeeping items there for you as well. Throughout the session, as I mentioned, it is being recorded. So if you can please have your microphone and camera switched off until the Q&A session at the end. We will have a chat pane open throughout the session. So if there is something that you wish to raise throughout, please do that through the chat session, and we'll have that monitored, and we'll bring those relevant points in as we move through. Just a note there that the recordings will be circulated via eZine and will be hosted on the Outscape website after the event. And just finally just said, you just use the chat function throughout to submit any questions to the speakers. We'll deal with the relevant ones throughout the session, and then we'll also have a little time at the end to pick up and mop up anything that we haven't covered. So I'm now going to hand you over to Joe and Elizabeth, who will lead the session. Thank you.
I think you're on mute there, Joe.
Sorry, that's the first mistake. Hi, I just want to introduce myself beforehand. I'm Joe Murray. I work in place shaping at Outscape. Myself and some colleagues within the place shaping team have carried out a lot of our recent SROI studies in the last couple of years. So I'll be jumping in a little bit later just to talk through step by step how we conduct our studies, and then run through a couple of case studies that we've got as well from the last couple of years.
Thank you. I'm Elizabeth Annett, Principal in Communication and Training at Outscape here. And one of the things I do within the organisation is oversee our insights projects. So what I'm going to do just before we sort of get stuck into the Social Travel Investment Toolkit is just to give you a bit of context in terms of the broader insight tools that we've been developing within Outscape over the last sort of 5 to 6 years. So these include the People in the Outdoors Monitor for Northern Ireland, aka PUMNI. That's our social science tool that collects population-wide data. Really helps us to understand how people are engaging with the outdoors and the benefits they gain at a population level, the barriers they face. Lots of really good insights are coming through PUMNI. We first ran PUMNI in 2020-21, and this year we're able to rerun the survey again. And it's similar to what the People in Nature survey is in Wales and England, and what the Scottish People in Nature survey is, in terms of providing us with that kind of key data around people's participation in the outdoors and how it links to better health and well-being. And all of that feeds into policy, so it really gives us lots of evidence to hopefully shape policy priorities for the better in relation to outdoor recreation. And another insights tool that we have developed over the last 5 years is the Greenspace MI map. And that's really about place understanding, where we have trails and green space across Northern Ireland, and actually where access is lacking. And that's been really instrumental in terms of helping us monitor key targets that we now have within the Programme for Government and the Environmental Improvement Plan. So the target there is for that annual increase in the percentage of households within 400 metres of accessible natural space. So that insights tool is really key to helping the government monitor progress, or indeed otherwise. And it can be used by stakeholders such as councils, government departments, NGOs, community groups, for example, to advocate for better investment and for helping to direct decision making and planning around where investment and new access or enhancing access and green spaces should go. And then today we're talking about the Social Return on Investment Toolkit. Toolkit's not new, it was first launched back in 2021. And there have been some updates to it that we'll walk you through today. But that's really an insight tool that allows us to articulate the value of the outdoors and to articulate that in a way that gives a monetary value. And often whenever we sort of share these types of data from the insight tools, so for example, like from Pumney, we know that there's like roughly 144 million visits to outdoors across Northern Ireland per year. From the Greenspace map, we know the percentage of people within 400 metres. But actually for politicians, the one figure that they remember is the social return on investment that a particular trail or site may have. That's the one that seems to stick with them. So all these different insight tools really help us to build the evidence case to inform policy going forward. So whenever we think about the importance of measuring value, I do think it's more important than ever. Whenever we first developed the tool back in 2021, that was obviously during COVID. And during that sort of, snapshot in time, I think most people, they could understand, they could perceive, they could feel the value of the outdoors. And I know we're all kind of during lockdowns maximising like our 1 hour allotted time to get outside and to exercise. So even like for politicians, for decision makers, they really understood the importance of the outdoors and they were, saying things around that. And I think maybe there's a little bit of amnesia has set in that maybe, we don't really appreciate to the extent that we're happy to continue to fund and to put the investment in that our Trails and Greenspace requires. And so I think actually, showcasing this toolkit again today and going through how you can articulate the value of trails in a monetary way is actually really, really important. Many of us, and I know, talking to councils and to lots of organisations, like funding is a massive challenge for the sector. And this toolkit is here to help you have a way of articulating value, communicating that effectively to key stakeholders. And it is because obviously, COVID, we all realise that there's lots of benefits that come from the outdoors. But we need to continue to communicate those effectively. And it's quite hard to do that because the benefits of being active in the outdoors, like the health benefits, the mental health, the well-being, the connecting to nature, building community, and all the sort of broader ecosystem services that our green spaces provide. Also the benefits and the economic uplift they bring to tourism and local economies. All of those things can sometimes feel hard to capture, hard to measure, but particularly the social aspects can be intangible. And feel kind of really quite difficult to sort of tie down and put a value alongside. So again, this toolkit will help us to provide like a robust method to do that. So moving on then, just to give you a bit more information around social return on investment. This may be new to some of you, it may not be new. Social return on investment is an approach that was adopted in the UK sort of back in the early noughties, so early 2000s. And it was a way that the Cabinet Office was championing to capture and account for social value that comes through different projects and programmes and interventions, and in our case infrastructure, to express the outcomes in a monetary way. And really since that approach has been adopted, lots of organisations have been using it to capture the benefits that they provide to society. So for example, Sport England has used it to measure the value that sport and physical activity brings in England. Forestry England, forestry research has used it. The Public Health Agency in Wales has used it. There's a whole host of organisations, NGOs, such as the National Trust, Woodland Trust, the Wildlife Trust have used it. So it is even now in our sector being a way that we can put a robust value on the benefit of trails and green spaces. There's key principles, and these are really, really important. And as we walk through today's webinar, hopefully you will see these principles come to life in terms of the things that you must try to do through a social return on investment study. So, for example, involving stakeholders. So talking to landowners, land managers, talking to users to identify, what actually happens on the trail, what matters, what changes through use. Valuing what matters, so finding appropriate financial proxies that you can put against those. The final three there are really important around, don't overclaim. You can really shout and sing about really high numbers, but actually it's important to actually underestimate so that you're really sure that what you're saying you can stand over. And being transparent about your methods, being transparent about how you've arrived at your final figures, and to be clear about the assumptions that you've used, about the data, the strengths and weaknesses of that data. And then finally to verify, so just, even just sharing results like we're doing today and having others scrutinise those, that's all really important in terms of providing validation to the results. So just a little bit on the toolkit before I hand over to Joe, who's going to walk you through the steps within the SROI Toolkit and our recent case studies. So this toolkit, as I mentioned earlier, was launched in 2021. We've updated it since. So as I said, we're very much happy to have this toolkit scrutinised. Whenever we first launched it, one of the first questions was, well, you haven't included maintenance costs. So we've updated the toolkit, and it now includes those maintenance costs that you can factor into your final figure. And we've also added in additional benefits that you can capture through the toolkit, so social connection benefits being one of those. And the toolkit consists of 3 components. So you have a user guide, and that walks you through how to basically use the standardized survey, and then how to use the valuation spreadsheet. And that spreadsheet comes with all those built-in formulas. You don't need to have a lot of knowledge in terms of using Excel spreadsheets in a complicated manner to be able to use this toolkit. And I think that's what makes it really valuable to organisations. It is very, very user friendly. And it is designed for organisations on the call. It's designed for community groups to provide that social value for your own trails, your own green spaces. However, it does have its limitations. It's not going to provide you with a figure for calculating tourism value or economic value as well. And for some sites where we've tried this, we've actually realised that the social value figure wasn't really representative of all the benefits it provides. So this is about social value. And if you have other projects that are more around sort of the broader economic or tourism value, you would probably need to use a different tool to get those captured accurately. So Joe, if I hand over to you, you can start to walk us through the different case studies that we've undertaken.
Yeah, thanks very much, Elizabeth. So just to, I suppose, start off there, here's just a flavour of some sites we've done SROIs at before. We've got our pilot sites that we did back in 2020, 2021, those being Ballynahinch and Bunkers Hill. And then we've done more recent ones as well. We've just completed and have just uploaded to our website new case studies for those carried out in 2025. And we've updated some of those in 2024 as well. I can appreciate here looking at this that it's all very localised to really sort of the Derry Morning Down area. Outscape ourselves don't manage or own any sites, so most likely is that we'll be carrying out SROI studies recently on sites that we've had some sort of involvement in, and that's typically with Derry Morning Down, who we've had a service level agreement with to carry out planning and feasibility and construction of new trails on the ground. So that's where we've focused our studies on most recently. I'll be walking you through these 6 steps of SROI, which is all provided and broken down in our user guide that we can provide to you afterwards. So we look at the number of users using their trail per year, we identify positive outcomes, we undertake a trail user survey, which there's a standardized survey template for, as Elizabeth talked through there. We account for dead weight and displacement, and I'll get a bit more detail into how we don't overclaim in our figures as one of our principles. And then we apply financial proxies that we can put the benefits into financial monetary terms, and then we input what it costs to build and maintain a trail as well. That's very important. So we can work out this ratio really of, for every £1 invested through the maintenance and the building of a trail and everything that goes into it, what in monetary terms is the social value we get back to users, so that we could fill it into business cases and communicate back to funders what the benefits have been, rather than just feeding back purely trail users or individual surveys themselves. So this series of hexagons and these steps will stay on the screen as we go here. So hopefully just follow it step by step. So user numbers are really the first step, and those are the foundation of most of the quantified outcomes of an SROI. They're really the starting point in terms of how we estimate the total reach of a new trail or an existing trail that we are surveying, so we can see the benefits across well-being, health, and economic outcomes. So without credible user data that you can rely on, everything really that follows in these steps perhaps comes less robust if you don't have that. So in terms of how we collect user data, the more traditional methods that we're using, which most will be familiar with, will be automated counters, these traditional break beam counters that are on site. They may use pressure pads, they may use gates, and those are typically, fixed on a site there. They come with their own challenges, as we'll know, and data quality sort of varies across all sites, and not all sites have consistent monitoring, if monitoring at all. So counters may undercount if particular groups of people pass these counters because they are fixed and there's the break beam going between them, or they may overcount people doing a series of loops of a site. It's counting one person several times on one visit. So we're now looking in. We've got a pilot study currently with an organisation called Active Exchange, who use GPS data from mobile phones, to hopefully get a more robust, a more reliable sense of who's using our sites, without the sort of fear of people not passing counters or counters falling into disrepair or batteries dying as well there. Another note there in terms of how we collect credible user data, we are also careful whenever we're using annual figures, we need those, that we don't try and use periods, maybe perhaps during COVID, where we all saw this massive influx of users into sites that died back down again. So we try not to use periods of temporary closures or COVID period spikes as well to estimate them so we don't underclaim, but particularly we don't want to overclaim. So essentially, what we're trying to get across here is just the user numbers, the backbone to an SROI, and it turns assumptions really into evidence that you can use, and you can be quite transparent about that, and it sort of grounds your estimates in the real world and real world values. So when you've built your trail, then it comes on to identifying what your positive outcomes are to measure. And our standardized survey works around positive outcomes that we've identified, but you may find that there's less to identify in yours, or perhaps more that you want to include. So this step really is about identifying the changes we expect to see or have seen with people or across the place. And it's every question that comes from this into the next survey that we'll go into is really just asking what's different for people now, trying to bridge the gap between what's happening on the site and what the impact is there. So if possible, you want to be using early conversations with land managers, if you're not the land manager yourself, looking at past evaluations and observing people on the site to sort of scope out what your outcome themes are. And these are 5 that we came up with back at the beginning of this. And Elizabeth, if you don't mind maybe going through each of these, I know you were involved at the time of coming up with these, so you might have a better understanding too of where these came from.
Yeah, so whenever we were developing the toolkit initially, we did online consultation, and we're very much trying to understand what are the positive outcomes that come from trails. So obviously physical health, that's quite an obvious one, so is well-being and mental health. And then there was a couple there, sort of learning about the natural world and the local environment. So that's one that we decided to include, and then connection to nature. So the original toolkit had those 4, and so if you were using the toolkit previously, those were the 4 that we would have had questions in the user survey, and that related to those. And then in the calculation spreadsheet, we had obviously the formula set up to work out then the value against each of those outcomes. And it was really just through then using the toolkit for a couple of projects, one being for a National Trust project where we were doing a social value assessment of Divis and Black Mountain. We actually thought, there's huge amount of social benefit that comes from from that green space and the trails up at Divis and Black Mountain. And so we added in social connection. So there's questions now in the user survey that relate to building relationships, either, you know, strengthening current relationships people have by working with each other, or indeed building new friendships, and also enhancing people's sense of pride of place. So that's just an additional one that we added in there. If there's other benefits that you think, you know, our green space or trail provides, you can of course add those in. It's just a case of adding in additional questions and then amending the calculation spreadsheet. So all of that's doable. But those are the 5 outcomes that we have. And then against each of those, then we have a financial proxy. But I'll hand back to you, Joe, because I know that's something you'll touch on soon.
Yes. Thanks, Elizabeth. The next step is really undertaking the trail user survey, and this is really kind of where the SROI starts to gain legitimacy. And as we said, we've got a standardized survey template there, but there'll be essential questions asked in there, but you can make it your own as well, at your own discretion too. In terms of people needing to fill it in, we've used SurveyMonkey where we can keep track of these. But as a rule of thumb, the official line in the user guides, if I'm thinking right, is 100 responses for a community scale site that we would say is required to get a statistically meaningful proportion of regular users surveyed. Now, we have carried out surveys with less, but what we have to be quite transparent about there is that the lower the responses, the more you have to really exercise caution with those responses. So the minimum threshold really isn't about just volume, but it's about representing the user types. So really 2 examples of that is we've had to, in the last year, throw out a couple of SROI studies and maybe come back to revisit them at a later date because the turnout was too low. We've worked with lower, but we're talking maybe like 11 people maybe filled out a survey. So it's just too low to get any sort of credible evidence from, and we've had to just, you know, put that aside for now. But we've also, for example, we carried out a survey at Gosford Forest Park, and the representation we found, well, we no real evidence of this, but we felt just from the survey responses that it had found its way perhaps into a mountain bike Facebook group, where we found that there was such a massive proportion of the responses were from mountain bikers that it just wasn't representative of the entire users of the park. So we had to set that one aside as well. So you may want to consider on-site surveying and allowing the time to do that as well, so you can make sure you're getting the users, intercepting people on the site, but also you're kind of aware about you're getting a good mix of users on the site too. So in terms of how we begin to quantify these different positive outcomes, we start to ask questions around them, and sort of non-negotiable questions really, and the survey will provide essential questions and you can add extra ones as well. But physical health benefits are the ones that we are probably the most stringent on, and there's another slide on this as well where we're asking people to describe their activity levels whenever they're undertaking activities at the trails, so that we can measure them up against CMO, Chief Medical Officer guidelines of a certain amount of minutes of vigorous exercise or moderate exercise a week. And we're asking that they're carrying those out at the trail. We're also asking how long do you spend taking part in activities to match up with that as well. And we're also asking people how have their health and fitness changed since they started using the trail, from much better to same to much worse and worse. And then we're also asking people to, you know, state on a sliding scale how they measure up, how they feel they measure up against certain statements. So we're asking people in terms of social connection, you know, did they enjoy spending time making connections with people they met on the trails or knew on the trails? Did they feel cheerful and in good spirits, felt closer to nature and learning about the natural world and local history and heritage? And we're quite stringent there as well. We're only collecting the data where people have checked that they strongly agree. So, you know, you're limited there, but it's also being quite transparent that you're relying on people being self-selective, and people are subjective, and people tend to, we find, not want to always tick strongly agree on these things. They'll maybe throw a few agrees in there so they haven't just ticked strongly for everything. So maybe that's sometimes where, you know, surveying people on the ground as well, you can have those conversations with them, but it means that we don't feel like we're over claiming in what we get back. We'd be more content that we're under claiming with these things. But what I've added in there in the title there is that's your quantitative data, and that's what you're gathering information so you can run a calculation with, and that's your bare minimum of what you want to be collecting in the surveys. But you don't want to be fatiguing people with the survey. But something we find is very useful to add in there as well is the kind of quality of the stories, the quotes from people as well. You know, you want to add some depth in as to why these numbers matter and sort of bring the data to life. So, for example, you know, you could intercept somebody who is 95 years old and still using the trail to get between their house and get their groceries, and they're staying independent and social and active. And you can't put that into your ratios and your numbers and your calculations, but stories like that kind of capture what you're trying to achieve with the survey. So sometimes having those stories in there as well can be just as persuasive as the data, then, depending on your audience. So at your own discretion, we recommend finding a balance between both and adding in some of those extra bits as well. You may want to also include your survey, you know, who's using the trail, age groups, and where people are coming from as well. But that's the opportunity to get all those in place. I did mention there we're really stringent around particularly the physical activity elements there. So we do account for dead weight and displacement. So essentially that's an example would be if you have your surveying a trail and you have another trail 5 minutes up the road. We are asking people direct questions to see if they're getting those benefits elsewhere, or if that trail didn't exist, would they just go there? Or vice versa, are they just getting the benefits they would have got somewhere else at the trail you're surveying? So we don't want to undermine social value by overstating it, and that's why we have these questions in here. So we're asking people, can you easily do the same activities in a similar landscape somewhere else within an area? And then in terms of people meeting that CMO guideline, and that's what we measure our physical health benefits from, we run a high estimate, and that's just people saying that they feel they strongly agree that they feel physically healthier from using the trail. But we also always publicize our low scenario, our low estimates, and that's from people who specifically state that they are carrying out either 150 minutes of moderate or 75 minutes of vigorous exercise per week at the trail. We're very specific about that. They're not just carrying that out and the trail supplements that they're getting those benefits, those full benefits at the trail as well.
Joe, just on that point there of accounting for dead weight and displacement, essentially what you're doing is you're removing oftentimes quite a sizable portion of those who would say they accrue benefits, but you're saying actually because of dead weight and displacement, we're going to remove you from the final calculation. What principles does applying this help us to align with?
I suppose I've probably said the word transparency about 10 times since I've started here, but transparency is really one of the big ones. And we're really showing where we work that out. The standardized survey and the user guide really allows you to really show you're working out, but it's the overclaiming as well. You don't want to overclaim. So this allows you to not penalize yourself. We find that we're removing about 10 to 30% of dead weight in our surveys in terms of our responses there. So if 80% of users say that they're more active because of this trail, but we estimate that 25% of them would have been active anyway, we will just count 55% as the true impact. So it's about not penalizing yourself, but it's just protecting your credibility in the survey as well. So you can have confidence in the numbers that you're stating. And we sort of find funders respect that transparency and that underclaiming as well, that you're not boasting these inflated numbers, that you've got figures that you can defend, really. But I suppose the next stage here is our financial proxies for each outcome. So these physical benefits that we're talking about, that we're asking these questions about, like, they don't have a market price. Really, you can't go down to the SPAR and buy these benefits. So what these financial proxies let us do is we approximate their value in a similar language, economic language. So it's not about putting the price on things, but it's just translating impact into that economic language that you could submit a business case, you could submit your 1 year later report to a funder as to what the benefits you got there. So just to pick out a few examples here, in terms of physical benefits, we take Northern Ireland context, sort of council run swim sessions or individual gym classes at council run leisure centres to quantify our physical benefits with. In terms of our environmental benefits as well, we're sort of taking the average fees for more immersive outdoor experiences and conservation-based recreation there, like foraging or bushcraft or other activities like that, national trust entries, all go into those averages, and we sort of work out sort of where's the middle line here, or even the lower end. And if we do feel that's over quantified, we may introduce factors of 2 and divide some of these as well further down if we feel they're being overstated, but just always showing our working out as we go along. But it's all about, I guess, keep going back to that word about transparency, and we're not making up money here. We're just working out sort of value equivalents with other benefits that you would get elsewhere. The final step really is the input, really. So kind of actually what comes first, we're putting last in this series. And that is working out your capital costs of the one-off spend to create the trail, your surfacing, signage, bridges, even your professional fees and your surveys that go into it. Everything that, if you're putting it in the context of your feeding back to a funder, you know, what, if a funder's giving you money at the start, what is that covered? Everything like that goes into your one-off professional fees. And one thing that's really important, actually, that we didn't have in our pilot studies that we took on feedback and we've included now, and we've seen it actually does have an impact in the outcome there, and we would always recommend including it, is your ongoing maintenance. So that's based on factors like the scale of your site, whether it's a small trail behind some houses, whether it has a small car park, whether there's bins, whether it's an established woodland at more risk of wind blow, how remote it is, and then, you know, staff presence on site to empty those bins and carry out sort of ongoing vegetation control and maintenance. But even central support staff time based in offices and admin time, we work in those sort of percentage of salaries. So for example, £40,000 actually would be quite reasonable. We would find maintenance going to a trail once you add all those things in. But when you multiply that across 25 years, which we would sort of say would be the lifespan of a trail, that turns into $1 million. So suddenly you've got over 4 times the build cost perhaps of a trail is the maintenance of that trail going forward, which, yes, does make the case for putting funding into these trails. It's not to put people off as well, because what I'd like to probably jump on quite quickly then too, because that sounds a bit doom and gloom, the actual cost of a trail, is going back to the outcomes, really. So what our calculation looks like is you have that input at the top, your total investment in terms of build cost and maintenance cost, and you can multiply that across 5, 10, 25 years. And the better you know your maintenance costs, the more accurate your figures can be. But again, we have a transparent calculation sheet that shows what you're putting in there, as long as you can back it up. Your output then is your total users at the beginning multiplied, depending on what comes out in the survey, is your percentage of those selecting strongly agree or those meeting a CMO activity target. All of this discounted for dead weight and displacement is going through. And then you're multiplying that by your financial proxies. So even where they might seem maybe quite high, you're maybe in some cases only multiplying those financial proxies by 10%, or even less in some cases. What you get at the end is your SROI, and that's represented in a ratio, really. So what's your input versus your output? And you multiply that by your 5, 10, 25-year returns if you want to forecast that. As long as you're multiplying your returns and you're multiplying your maintenance costs to go with that, they should stack up. So I've got a couple of case studies here. Just going to go through them quite quickly. One site we've carried out here in 2025 is Ockram Hill Wood. It's acquired by the Woodland Trust. It's currently bare hillside. These pictures were taken a couple of years ago, so hopefully more established now that 110,000 trees have been planted, and then those will establish over the next 25 years if that's the lifespan. But it was developed in 2020 with 2.3 miles of walking trails to a cost of about £230,000. On-site counters are working out about 45,000 annual visitors, which is actually really, really quite high, and it neighbours Mourne Park there as well. So we carried out our survey in the last year there, and we've just published these on our website here. I think Elizabeth just sent in a link. This is a very simplified version of the calculation tables that we provide. Again, not to be daunting, the formulas are all there on our website there in the user guide, but this is just simplified to make it a bit more presentable for a case study. But I'll break it down a little bit here in terms of your input and your annual visitors, your 45,000 visitors. Your positive outcomes are measured by those who are either ticking strongly agree to a user survey, or for physical health benefits, it's those that are meeting the CMO guidelines at the trail. So you can actually see that's really quite low. So from that, we multiply our user numbers, and we work out, well, the number of visits that get into positive outcomes are X, Y, and Z, multiplying those by our proxy values, and then we come out with our total annual positive outcomes along the final column here. Dropping down here, then we have our annual social value, and then we can multiply that by 25. And we have our inputs as well. We can multiply by 25 for maintenance. So Auckram Hill, let's be a high example, comes out at, for every £1 spent, £14 return over 25 years. So you would expect in 5 years you would have less of a return, and that builds and compounds year on year. We've developed our own case study infographics as well that we can share with the partners, like for example in the Woodland Trust that we developed this with. But it just means that we can put these figures in the middle here. Now, again, in terms of transparency, we combine those just for the infographic here and not for the calculation. We combine those tick and strongly agree and agree in these figures. But in terms of working the calculations, we use strongly agree. We measure how far people are from their homes picked up in the survey, and we can input these various other various points here in terms of a site overview. And again, just picking up those small quotes that we pick up along the way. People, just little snippets of what people have said in the survey. We ask sort of open-ended questions at the end, just in your own words, what do you get out of these trails? Second example here is Seaford Wood. This was an SROI carried out just the year before, but developed around the same time as Auckram Hill on private land, on Seaford Estate and neighbouring private land that was planted up in around the millennium. About 4 times less annual visitors to this trail, and about half the build cost as well. So including this just for a bit of comparison to sort of see where the differences are in the calculations whenever you have different figures to work with. So you can see there, just even to skip to the end, rather than a £14 return, you have a £6 return for Seaford. The key things there that impact that really, we've picked up our estimated annual visitors really make a dent in it. Those tick and strongly agree have a big influence on it, because here people are tick and strongly agree less often for Seaford than they are for Auckram Hill. So those two things have really brought down it to 6 rather than 14. The other element in terms of the input as well is that annual maintenance cost over 25 years. So yes, this is a smaller maintenance cost as well, which does maybe lift up the amount of return on investment you can get, because it's half that of Auckram that we've worked out. But those would be our three big impact things we've found is the annual survey, annual visitor numbers, those tick and strongly agree, and your maintenance costs that really compound over 25 years or what have you as well. And that's how we present it back in a survey as well. We have various infographics. These are ones we've developed ourselves. These aren't included as part of the user guide, but just gives an idea of how they can be sort of quantified into a one-pager case study as well, with the backing up of all your tables and your survey results as well, that you can drop in as you need to. And I'll just leave you here with, here's just some, we've just uploaded there this week, new blog, which I believe Elizabeth has shared the link to there, of our 6 most recent case studies that we've done. So you'll see there, we've got Seaford and we've got Auckram Hill, but we've got 4 more there as well. And we're very transparent about how we've come to these figures of £8, £4, £14, £6 as well. But really encourage you to have a quick look at those as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. So whenever you have your results, the next question is, well, how are you going to share them to leverage impact? Because I think the results really do speak for themselves. And as I said earlier, certainly whenever we have communicated social return on investment case studies and results, particularly to politicians, this is the one that seems to stick. So here are just like some tips on the screen in terms of how you can share and communicate this for impact. So as we've done here, we've invested some time and indeed a little bit of money to create an infographic. And the infographic allows you just to summarize the key data, because if you share a whole report, the chances of somebody getting to the end of the report may be quite slim. So an infographic allows you to communicate the key stats quite quickly, really effectively. And as Joe has said there, you can input, quotations and stories from the actual users. And that just brings it to life. I think sometimes, and I find this with research, is if you're dealing with a lot of quantitative aspects and a lot of statistics and data and figures can all seem a wee bit dry. So actually making sure that you bring through the human story and for them to have their own voice heard is really, really important. So sharing quotations is one way of doing that. One of the things we have actually at the end of the user survey, and if you use the user survey, you can decide whether to keep it in or to get rid of it, is we have a statement that says, if you would like to provide a video testimonial, to leave your contact details. And then it's really up to the person themselves if they want to do that. But again, those types of storytelling can be really, really effective. Obviously, tailor your messages. So, if you're trying to talk to local communities about the benefit of a local trail, they might be more interested to know, who's going. So a bit of a summary in terms of the composition of people, the demographics of people going there, how far they've travelled, how long they're staying, what activities they're undertaking. Whereas the funder may be more interested maybe in that social return on investment figure. So here, for example, for Tobermoor, you can see that £1 spent gets £8 return. So for the organisation responsible, they're maybe more interested in the financial side. So there's lots of different things that you can communicate, tailor your messaging so that you're hitting the right audiences with the right messages. And then try and use the results as much as possible, be it in presentations, in reports, so that this can be part of your sort of evidence building around building the business case for trails. And as Joe said there, sometimes you think that the big cost in a trail is the capital costs to kind of get it on the ground, but actually it's the ongoing maintenance costs. And to keep places usable and attractive for people, we do need to invest in the maintenance of those. So using the results to continue the advocacy work around that is really, really important. And then one of the things that we have learnt is rather than just do like a one-off social return on investment case study, which provides you like with a snapshot in time and a bit of a forecast, you can use it for ongoing monitoring. So for example, as maybe you enhance or as perhaps a trail sort of changes in its landscape. So for example, take Ockram Hill, where there's loads of trees planted. Obviously, that's going to change as the trees get bigger. That landscape is going to be augmented and enhanced. So therefore, you may want to go in and actually rerun the social return on investment to see actually, is it attracting more people? As Joe says, the more users you have, that's a big factor in terms of the final SROI output. So using it as a way to kind of do ongoing monitoring can be really, really valuable to help understand what is changing and why. Just to give you some examples, because I suppose sometimes these research toolkits can seem often kind of very conceptual, theoretical, dry, boring, whatever. We have been using these in the real world. Obviously, Joe's shared the ones that we've developed internally that are on the website. You can go and view them there. But we've also undertaken these for other projects. The biggest one more recently has been for Divis and Black Mountain. So we did a social value assessment as part of a broader natural capital account for Divis and Black Mountain. And that was used to support the business case for the bid that National Trust were successful in getting £3 million to enhance access to that site, enhance biodiversity and the long-term sustainability of Divis and Black Mountain. What we did there was we just used the social value generated figure, and we didn't give the return on investment purely because National Trust said it's problematic for us to try to provide the costs of maintaining open access land. So for that reason, that's why we have that social value. Through the toolkit, you will get that social value. It's really then the costs and subtracting the costs and maintenance costs that then gets you return on investment. We did the social return on investment approach for an evaluation of the Arnie Battlefield Trail, and that was a requirement for the National Lottery Heritage Fund in Dara. And for that one, we could do a return on investment. So we found through that study that £1 spent is bringing £9 back to users through social value. So that formed the evaluation of that project. So again, if you have to provide evaluation reports, this toolkit, it's there, it's ready, it's recognised, you can use that, and as long as you just run it past your funder to say, is this an evaluation format that you'd be happy with, then it's something that you can run with. And we have done another study, and I know, Joe, you're going to redo this study where you were looking at the social value for the Brushy Riverside Walk. Do you want to maybe just touch on what you did initially for that, and then your plans to redo it with much more improved data?
Yes. So this was a study done just about a year or two ago. It was a partnership with Queen's University. And it was done without visitor number data. We didn't have the data for it. So I know that I sort of said previously that was a very important part of it. So it's one that we haven't really publicized. It was just done to work out an indicative. And what we did there was we just really underestimated what the data would be. And we sort of said, in the instance that you had 1,000 users per year or per month, so 12,000 users per year, this is what the social return on investment would be. So we changed that language around it. It was a what if scenario. But now, just to want to drop in here that we've now got a pilot with an organization, I did mention this earlier, called Active Exchange, who work off GPS signals and mobile phones. And they work out that their data is roughly about 90% accurate currently. And more reliable than physical counters on the ground, that in that it doesn't break and doesn't need that ongoing maintenance. So it's something we're piloting for 12 months, but our intention with that is that we will actually look at Brushy Riverside Walk, hopefully as part of that, and get user numbers for the last 12 months on there and run that SROI again with the actual user numbers so we can get a more reliable figure. So there may be a webinar coming up in the new year, hopefully on Active Exchange and what we're initially finding that pilot project as well. So I'd recommend keeping an eye on your inboxes as well, as we may do a webinar on that in the next few months.
Yeah, that's a really, really exciting project, and it allows us to capture the number of users where we don't have visitor counters installed. So that's a huge number of sites. So actually this pilot's going to be really, really important. So Joe's given a teaser there for the upcoming webinar, so keep your eyes peeled for that. So just to wrap up before we sort of open up a bit of Q&A, just a sort of summary of key takeaways. So as we've seen, I'm sure everybody on this call recognises that trails deliver much more than just recreational opportunities, and that they provide huge social value. And our toolkit allows you to capture those positive outcomes of health and improved well-being, social nature connection, and the learning benefits. And the toolkit is there to give you that sort of structured method that's recognised, that's validated, to make those benefits visible and comparable. It's not perfect, and we've gone through to say, you know, there are a few weaknesses in it, you know, things like capturing accurate visitor numbers, knowing your maintenance costs, using comparable proxies. You know, there are areas where, yes, you have to be as credible as you can be. However, it does provide as robust measure as we can currently get for calculating social value of our trails and green spaces. And all of that is really, really important so that we can strengthen the case for investment. And in today's climate, that is really, really important. Once you have the results, it's important for us then to use the results and to share those effectively, to influence others so that we can move planning forward, that we can ensure that the broader funding environment, the broader policy landscape is leaning in our favour. So that's a run through today of the Social Return on Investment Toolkit and the updates that we've made to it and the recent case studies that are available online. And maybe, Jen, if I hand back to you, we can open the floor for some questions.
Thanks, Elizabeth and Joe, for that. Yeah, absolutely. And also, everyone, you'll just notice in the chat there, Elizabeth has shared the links to the toolkit, some of the case studies that have been discussed today, and also the blog piece that has been written with regards the value of trails. So just about to open the floor. You've done well, both in terms of time. That's great, allowing 10 minutes just at the end of the session to just try and keep us on time. I'm sure everyone is just aware of that. So is there anyone that has any questions with regards applying the toolkit to their site or landscape? For Elizabeth and Joe, maybe some various different sites that might give our presenters an option there, just to provide you with their experience on Yes, Carol, thanks. Do you have a question there?
Yeah, so I've got trails across private land that I have, and putting in a people counter isn't really an option. And I'm just wondering, how do I kind of accurately, or as accurately as possible, get a grasp on that? I don't think that my numbers are ever going to be sufficient for really robust data, but at the same time, given the program for government and being in a rural area and providing that access to green space for non-landowning people in rural areas, I'm just wondering how I can maybe use this as a go forward point.
Thanks, Carol. I might actually delegate this to Joe, because Joe, you are a people counter expert internally. What would you recommend to Carol?
So sure, but I suppose that, yeah, that would be a challenge now, I suppose, if it's a site that maybe isn't getting huge visitor numbers and you don't have the counter data there. You could, in one instance, sort of work out an estimate. It may involve running like a daily average or doing a few spot checks and trying to extrapolate that across what you might get in a year might be the best option. But I suppose it's that transparency there. It's showing how you came to that conclusion. If you're saying, if I have 30 people across the land per year, multiply that by 365, I'm working with that number there. But it's just being clear of your confidence levels and your assumptions that you're making there as well. Other options, I'm trying to think of any other options would be, it would be if you didn't have a physical counter in the ground, you didn't have access to like GPS data and licenses, which are more expensive again than those physical counters in the ground. It may just be individual monitoring, in-person monitoring, maybe for spot checks throughout the year and trying to run the most reliable figure you can sort of extrapolate from that and working with that. But yeah, coming back and being transparent with that as well as to how you've come to that final figure is very useful. Or you run a instance of, I think this is the number I'm getting. If that's the number, then this would be the data I'm getting back. This would be the return on investment I'm getting back.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Elizabeth. And I see something in there from Vince.
Yeah, so if SROI becomes the default evidence, is there a danger this value of the small places become lessened? I suppose yes, that would be a risk now, and it's something we're looking into with this pilot project with Active Exchange. We're running on a very small basis where we're only checking about roughly 20 sites, and we're getting the data for that just to pilot to see how it works and how does it compare. It's not a conversation we've even had yet, but it's something we might look towards if it works really, really well and there's appetite for it with various partners that if we got a consortium deal where we could measure. I don't think we'd ever instance where we get unlimited sites, but we may find a consortium deal with lots of partners paying in where we can monitor through GPS data, 100 sites or more than that. And that's me guessing. I don't know if that's actually going to happen, but maybe that's an instance where we would be able to run a call for sites as to where we want to get the information from. And we'd let that inform how much we invest in Active Exchange year on year, if it works like we expect it would. And we could run SROIs for those, just to pick up those small sites as well, and we make sure they don't miss those too. Or we run a comparable site. Another example would be if you know of another site very like yours in terms of scale and user numbers that you've sort of perceived, you could refer to another case study and say, here's another example very like mine in these elements, and you could point towards that and say, well, that one's getting a £3 return. I would estimate roughly the same for my own site, and just be clear that you're not referring to your own site, you're just trying to draw comparisons there.
Just to follow on from what Joe has said there, Carl, I think certainly if you feel that the user numbers are small, you could take a spot check on certain days. So you could pick a weekday, maybe a weekend day, and just have to count the number of people and then gross those up so that you can get an estimate for the year. As long as you're transparent and that was the best means by which you could capture the visitor number, then that's fine, and that's fine with the best credible data that you have for now. So I don't think that should stop you. It may just take a little bit of human resource to capture that data.
Yeah, and I guess, Elizabeth, that's just echoing then, just like a reminder then of the key inputs that make the biggest difference in the overall figure. Then, Joe's saying being transparent and obviously having those visitor figures are important. Anything else then you want us to remind the group then of what they need to be aware of?
Yeah, so Joe, you had talked about sort of the three biggest factors, because obviously you do have a variance, not a huge one, across the case studies that we have run, but you were saying things like obviously your total number of users, because you're multiplying those against positive outcomes, the proxies, the maintenance costs, that can be a hidden one that I say whenever you gross up over the lifetime of a trail can be quite significant. And then the other one being the percent you're actually strongly agreeing as opposed to just agreeing. So those are the three ones. Is there anything else, Joe, that sort of stands out in terms of like an input that can, hold more weight in terms of the final figure?
I suppose that's the inputs we work with. The maintenance one I'd maybe come back to and just say it's really considering all the elements that go into maintenance there. As sort of said at the start, we don't own or maintain any sites. We would come in and consult and develop them and hand them over at the end. So what we have worked out, we've sort of got an internal management and maintenance matrix that we've developed, and we've cross-checked with various councils as well. And it's making sure we include everything that we feel goes into the maintenance of a site and the upkeep. And that is, staff presence on site really does add up throughout the year. If people are emptying bins 2 to 3 times a week, it's that fraction of their salary, but also the admin time, the central support time that goes into just the paperwork that goes with running the trail. Storm damage risk, different sites will have greater storm damage risk if the trees are much more established, if it's in a commercial forest versus a younger sort of broadleaf woodland would have different levels of risk there. And your footfall as well in terms of the actual feet that are going across the trail in the year as well, just the maintenance and this resurfacing that has to go in there too. So it's really thinking about, if you manage your site, it's being very clear. If you're managing your site, you can be much more clear on what your actual management maintenance costs are. The ones we've worked out with, we've had to be quite clear that we've worked out on because this site is this scale, we don't know the council's actually spending that much money on the trail, or the land manager's actually spending that much money on that trail, but it gives an expected standard of care, really, and not necessarily the current reality. So the more realistic you can be with your numbers, the better, I think. But in terms of the inputs, I think what we've got in there, we feel is quite clear and does represent what the inputs are. It's just the more accurate you can be with those, the better, I suppose, is what I'm saying there.
Okay. Just seeing another note there just in the chat with regards the potential health impacts such as those used in the WHO heat tool. Just wondering, there's just a query there. I wonder if we have looked at those as well.
Yeah, so we undertook a project a couple of years ago for the Northern Ireland Environment Link and developed for its members a social prescribing evaluation toolkit. So that looked much more at capturing health and wellbeing benefits of green social prescribing programs. And we looked at different ways of quantifying that health economic benefit. So it is different to this sort of broader social value return on investment approach, because it's much more tailored towards specific social prescribing programs. It's hard to get a tool that does something for everything. And I think, you need to be a bit more specific. So for trails that's on a community's doorstep and that's providing this kind of broad value, this toolkit would be appropriate. Where you have a specific kind of social prescribing program and you've got people that are being referred onto it, then this wouldn't be necessarily appropriate. You need something a bit more tailored towards health economic value and understanding what changes there and why, I'm trying to put a health economic monetary value on that. That's where the social prescribing toolkit would be much more appropriate. So there's lots of toolkits out there. We're aware of that. And as I said earlier, if you've got a site, we tried to do a social value case study looking at Gosford. And what we realised was actually the social value toolkit that we have here probably isn't appropriate for Gosford, because actually Gosford offers lots of benefits beyond social value. So it goes into the local economy and drawing people there from afar. So we haven't actually shared that as a case study because we realise it's probably not accurately capturing everything that needs to be captured for Gosford. So it is being cognizant of all those different benefits and picking the right tool, the right research method to capture those. And sorry, that's not a straightforward answer either.
And just a final one, maybe we'll just close off here. You know, we will give Elizabeth and Joe's email address just at the end, and if you want to speak to them separately on anything, you can contact them. But just with regards maintenance, our site's beginning to look at setting aside a fund for catastrophic repair, rain and wind, yeah, given the recent events, or even after a mass use event. Have you seen that, Joe, actually, in any of the sites? Are they setting aside this I guess really to protect and future-proof themselves in terms of these
I'm
maintenance
aware,
costs?
I'm not overly informed on what the current position is. I'm aware that various local authorities here in Northern Ireland are sort of in the early stages or maybe sort of working through emergency planning, forecasting and how they're going to manage that. I know even from Storm Iowan, there's a 3-year backlog in terms of tree surgeons being able to, you know, still deal with the storm damage and sites are still closed there. And you know, if that's going to become more frequent as well, then that 3-year backlog is going to become a 5-year backlog, going to become a 7-year backlog. So I'm not sure actually how local authorities or land managers are dealing with that at the minute. It might be a question even if any attendees want to answer that as well would be great. But I wouldn't be just as on top of where different land managers are with that right now.
Okay. Yeah, it's definitely something that we're going to, that land managers and site managers are going to need to look at. I agree with that, Vincent. So if there's not anything else, I would just like to invite you to, if you can, take your phone and just take a quick screenshot of or photo the QR code there just to give us a bit of feedback on the training session, and let us know what you thought. That would be great. It just helps us shape our training sessions for stakeholders, and create and tackle topics that are relevant to you. As mentioned, this will be hosted on the Outscape website. The links there, which you should all have in your Teams chat, for all the resources as well. And if there is anything else, please feel free. Joe's email address is the same, not letting you get away, Joe. Give your contact details out as well. So it's just Joe, Joe at out-scape.com. I know Joe and Elizabeth would be happy to speak with you separately if you had any queries. But hopefully you find that interesting. As Joe has mentioned, we will be focusing, it is our plan in the new year to focus on a webinar in the new year with regards visitor data and collections. So given the importance of that into something like this, hopefully that will be useful to you as well. And we'll take some of the comments on board from that and build it into the session in the new year. So thank you very much for attending, and we're just a few minutes over. So thanks for that. I'll let you all go and get your lunch. Thanks again. Thanks both.
Thanks very much.
Thanks all.
Bye. Bye-bye.